Hello YouTube and welcome back. I am Kieran Singer here to bring you more creepy content here at Undead Storyteller. I won't bore you all with a long, elaborate introduction this time like I did the other day. Every link that you could need or want is in the description below, from my email for those seeking to share their personal horror stories, to the channel's memberships link if you're interested to check that out, as well as the merch store, playlist to other content, and more. So if information is what you're after, be sure to head down there and have a look-see before this video ends. I hope everyone has been enjoying their holiday season so far and staying safe, as well as getting the chance to steal every moment of relaxation that you can take for yourself. Don't forget that your mental health matters. Now, without further ado, we'll get right into today's video. These are some extra creepy night shift stories that gave me goosebumps to read. Be sure to hit like and subscribe for me if you love this video and want to see more content from this channel, as well as tap that notification bell while you're at it, and that is for your benefit so that you never miss out on new uploads. Get ready to embrace the terror, everyone, because here we go. I worked the night shift at a long-term care home for a while. I had a resident bell ring at 2:59 a.m., so I went in and asked her what she needed. She proceeded to scream that there was a man in her bathroom and that I needed to get him out. People wandering into other people's rooms wasn't an uncommon occurrence at that place, so it wasn't surprising or out of the ordinary. I asked her what the man looked like, and that's where the story takes a wild left turn. She told me that he was a black figure who had no face. I calmed her down and went over to the bathroom door and told whoever was in there that they needed to leave her alone. Then I went back to my charting. Around 3:10, I had another call bell ring from the other end of that same floor. I went to that resident's room and asked if he needed pain meds, which he was on at the time. He told me no, that the reason that he called me was because there was a quote-unquote creepy man with no face in his room, and that I needed to get him out. My blood ran cold. I had a nurse stay on the floor with me for the rest of that shift. I work as a nurse at a hospital in the UK that was initially constructed during World War II. It was initially meant to be a temporary facility, but that ended up not being the case. It was further built upon and remains as a slightly modernized building. I recall doing a night shift during the winter time. There was a patient admitted to us with an infection, but we had no patients with illnesses that could affect cognitive function, i.e. dementia, learning difficulties, etc. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the patient that I mentioned, the one with the infection, began to shout from the side room that they had been placed in. Another nurse and I responded. Once in the room, I tried to diffuse the situation and calm the patient down. All the while, the patient was screaming about how a man with a bag over his head had been standing at the foot of the bed, watching her. I could tell that something was off in the room. I felt a shift in the energy of the environment, despite telling the patient that there was nothing to be concerned about. Once we had her settled, the other nurse, who had gone in there with me, told me that as she turned to leave, she witnessed what could only be described as a shadowy figure. It passed through a set of double doors outside the room in which the upset patient resided. The doors are behind a small alcove, So you can't see them from that room, but once you leave the room, you can. After a few seconds, it clicked for both of us that the double doors are locked. They have to be unlocked with keys at each entry or exit. The amount of time that it took between us seeing the figure pass through that area versus the amount of time that it would have taken us to unlock said doors, go through them, and lock them again created an inexplicable impossibility. We both formed the conclusion that something otherworldly must have occurred right before our eyes. An entity of some sort had revealed itself to us. We returned to the desk, unnerved. I used to work as a security officer. I was asked to work a Saturday night shift at an old warehouse in Dudley. I turned up at 5 p.m. It was a huge brick building with some makeshift offices at the front. I walked in, took the keys from the day officer, and locked the doors behind him. Everything seemed normal for a while. It was a little creepy, as the building was so old, but I was used to that kind of environment. Around 1 a.m, I got a call from the warehouse manager. One of his night shift drivers had forgotten his paperwork, and he asked me to go into the office right at the back of the warehouse and collect it for him so that he could come pick it up. I said fine, and headed back there. The warehouse was pitch black. I had a small torch that only slightly lit my way. I walked through until I got to the office, which had a huge metal sliding door. It made a screeching noise as I pulled it open. The fax machine right in front of me as I walked inside was blinking, and the paperwork was in the process of being printed out. It finished, I grabbed it, then went to leave. As I turned around, however, I looked toward the other end of the office. When I did so, I saw what I can only describe as a dark figure hunched over, shivering. I could hear what sounded like breathing. The kind of shaking, rattling breathing of someone who is freezing cold. I stood there for about 30 seconds, motionless, staring at it. Then I turned back slowly, slid the door closed behind me, and rushed back to the front. I locked that door and waited for the driver. An hour later, the driver collected his paperwork, and for the rest of the night, I convinced myself that it was just the dark playing tricks on me. But it didn't stop me from checking the cameras every few minutes. 5 a.m. rolled around, and I got a knock on the door from the day officer. I handed him the keys, expecting him to come in, but he locked the door from the outside, so I asked him what he was doing. He told me that he doesn't go inside when he knows that no one is in there, that he sits in his car and waits. I told him I thought that was a bit strange. In response, he stared at me for a second before asking if I went anywhere other than the security office. I relayed the story of my having to go back to get the paperwork the night before, leaving out the odd bit naturally. I'll never forget the look that he gave me, or what he said next. His exact words were, "Well, then you know why I don't go in there alone then." I shrugged it off, basically just said, "Okay then," and left for home. But it gave me chills, and still does when I think about it. I work overnight in a funeral home. My shift begins at 7 p.m. and I get to go home at 6 in the morning. We've had some creepy things happen, and as somewhat of a paranormal aficionado, I have to admit that I am loving it. Quite often outside the preparation room where we embalm the bodies, we'll hear footsteps pacing in the hallway. At any given point, there are no more than 4 people in the building on a normal night. So, for 2 people to be in the prep room and hear this while everyone else is out on first calls would rule out the footsteps having belonged to any other coworkers. 2 to 3 times a week, the door to my office will close on its own. The other day, for example, I walked through the office door after getting a drink from our break room and went to the dressing area when the door slammed shut behind me. It also happens when I'm at my desk and totally alone in the funeral home. In the hallway outside my office with the self-slamming door, I can also hear footsteps pacing back and forth. I tend to simply close my office door for myself when this is happening, just to muffle it so I don't have to listen to it all. Switching back to the prep room, one night I was chatting with 2 other coworkers outside of it. We had just finished embalming someone and were chatting, taking a bit of a break before cleaning up and sterilizing everything. We were all standing outside the door when we heard something hit the far wall of the prep room and then hit the ground. Me being me, I went to investigate. It was one of our embalming tools, and we had all seen the last person to use it set it down on his prep table 30 feet away from where I found it laying. Admittedly, this next one was not my personal experience, but that of my coworker on a different shift. He swears that he was alone in the building while prepping somebody, and the phone on the wall started dialing out. It dialed to a funeral home in Missouri, the same funeral home that the person on the prep table was being shipped to. This last one is the most recent, having just occurred last night. We have industrial yellow cabinets that our flammable fluids are stored in. On top of those cabinets are plastic bins, which I won't go into the details of their intended purposes, but anyways. I walked around the corner just in time to see them fly off the top of the cabinet and scatter across the floor. I work part-time security at an outpatient facility. On average, I work at the hospital about 6 times a month. I can go weeks without anything happening, then for no apparent reason have a night where something is constantly going on. Some of these things can be rationalized. Others, not so much. I do bi-hourly checks throughout a 12-hour shift. This requires me to walk around the facility, make sure that the doors are locked, even if I know that I already locked them. Basically document anything that might happen. Hospitals in general always come with some capacity of despair. I've worked at this hospital for maybe 6-7 months, and I don't have an incredible knowledge of the lore here. On most nights, I'm here with 2 nurses and a maximum of 3 patients on average. These nights are typically uneventful. Then, at least once every 2 months or so, I have to guard the facility by myself. There are 2 stories that I'm aware of. One is about a patient who passed away unexpectedly at the end of one of the corridors. I constantly have to open that door because it closes by itself. I'll open it, and when I go to do my checks, it will be closed again. I put this to the test one night. I opened it, then walked in a circle around the corridor. By the time I made it back around, it was already closed again. One of the older nurses had a son who passed away in the hospital after a surgery. That's a sad occurrence as it is, but before she quit, She said that she could sense her son's presence in the room that he passed away in. At the time, I assumed it was a coping mechanism on her part. But in that room, I can occasionally see a shadow moving from one corner to the other. These were all the things that you can possibly talk me into rationalizing to some degree. As for the next three things, I would have to be persuaded a bit harder. First, the thing that got me looking over my shoulder for a while. It happened when I went into the break room to make a pot of coffee. My back was turned toward the open room, and as I was fumbling around for cream and sugar, I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the tile floor. I turned around, fully expecting to get no closure whatsoever regarding the sounds, but instead had the pleasure of witnessing a chair move a good 1.5 feet on its own. I got out of there and went back to my post. I didn't bother with the coffee. Didn't know what else to do. The next thing was in the form of an apparition. I had never seen anything like it before, and it bothered me for days afterward. I was conducting my rounds of the facility, making my way down the same corridor that I had mentioned earlier. I checked a few of the rooms, then turned to leave. When I did, I saw a white, shrouded figure standing in the doorway about 5 feet ahead of me. I dropped my keys and flashlight on the ground and sort of tripped into the adjacent room. I was processing what it was, but when I looked back, the doorway was empty. On further observation, there was no one else in the hallway, which I already knew, but needed to confirm what I saw. I further inspected the room, and also did a recheck of the facility for my own reassurance. Nothing. I was the only one on the premises. This last recollection is hands down what scared me the most. There is a storage room in the middle of the hospital. I hate this room for a variety of reasons, the main one being that whoever designed the plans for the building stuck the light switch in the very center. When I have to turn it off, I then have to navigate my way back out in the dark. The room is pitch black once the lights are out. One night I went into the room to make sure the back door was locked. When I shut off the lights to close it down, in my ear, clear as day, I heard, "Shh." I could feel the physical presence of someone behind me. My ears reacted the way they would as if somebody was really right in my ear, speaking in a forced whisper. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the only way that I can describe it. I made sure that I was out in the hallway before shining my light back into the room. Again, nothing. Later, I put a small figurine of the Virgin Mary in that room, underneath one of the shelves, as well as a medal of St. Francis de Sales that I got for my confirmation about 12 years ago. Since doing that, I haven't had any more experiences while I'm in there. I welcome any and all skepticism. I'm skeptical myself in most instances. But this is what a hospital night shift can entail. There are knocks. There are footsteps. There definitely seems to be a presence here, and I am not the only one who has experienced it. I am a registered nurse. In my career of floor nursing, I have many stories, as I'm sure many nurses do. Here's one that comes to mind immediately for me. There was an older woman who, at the end of the shift, interrupted me while I was checking in on her. She raised her shaky, gnarled hand and pointed in my direction. "Could you please tell him to leave?" she asked. I turned around, seeing only the empty corner of the room behind me. "Who?" I replied. "Him," she insisted, her face completely serious. "I don't like him. Tell him to leave." I thought this whole interaction was strange. She wasn't a psych patient. She had no history of hallucinations or anything of that sort. "Ma'am," I told her. "There's no one there, ma'am. It's just you and I." She just kept staring at the corner. "No," she said. "There's a man in the corner wearing a dark hood. Tell him to leave." Not long after that, I finished my shift and went home. The next week when I came back, that patient was no longer in that room. After inquiring around with different coworkers, I found out that she had passed away 2 days after the night when she and I had our bizarre interaction. I still get chills when I think about it.